Давайте, добрый день.
Good afternoon, dear participants. I suggest that we take seats. The Stolypin Forum continues. After yesterday's vibrant discussion at the plenary session that was related to the development of the entire global economy, and we have discussed the major trends, what we are to get ready for, particularly entrepreneurs. Today we would like to focus on Russia's economy. We will be talking about that quite for a long. Unfortunately, there is so much talk about it. Yet the question for every entrepreneur is very important indeed, because we see that the trends that are unfolding, despite the fact that we seem to have come out of the corona crisis, we seem to be going back to those systemic problems that we have witnessed in our economy for a while now, and we continue speaking about how to make sure that the economy grows, and as economy of entrepreneurs. So today, we would like to focus on how this could be achieved. And today, I'm joined on the panel by a number of people. The first one is Alexander Buxman, First Deputy Prosecutor General of the Russian Federation; Konstantin Babkin, Chairman of the Federal Council of the Party Delo, the Party of Business; the Political President of the New Commonwealth Industrial Union. He owns Rosspetsmash and a group of other companies. Arkady Dvarkovich, chairman of the entire Skolkovo Foundation. It shouldn't be overlooked that he is the FIDE president now. Mr. Vladislav Inozemtsev, Russian economist, who is a rare guest. We used to work together. We elaborated the first program along with Yevlinsky, modernization, with ZA meaning for modernization. Viktor Semyonov, chairman of the supervisory board of Belaya Dacha JSC. Mr. Ilya Sachkov, the founder of the IB Group. We are also joined by Mr. Kolesnikov Sergei, co-owner and head of the company Technonicol. And our online speakers. Today we are joined by several online speakers. Well, let's just name them, and hopefully they will join us. Patrick Anthony, chairman of the board of directors of Inca Group Russia, the IKEA, to put it simply. Ms. Ksenia Bezuglova, winner of the Miss World 2013 for women in wheelchairs, member of the Council on Guardianship under the government of the Russian Federation, member of the Commission for People with Disabilities under the President of the Russian Federation, the co-chair of the party Rost. Ksenia, how are you today? She's fresh from a surgery, but she seems to look okay. Better than anyone else. She is always on the positive note. Mr. Yevgeny Kogan, I don't see him yet. Yakov Mirkin, head of the International Capital Markets Department of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Mr. Vadim Sorokin, president and CEO of Gaz Group. Good afternoon. And Friedrich Reinfeldt. Fredrik is a Swedish statesman, as a politician, as my notes say, and he is the Prime Minister of Sweden in 2006 to 2014. We're happy to welcome you. And I think that we would give the floor to you first, Mr. Reinfeldt. We know the difficult period Sweden is going through when the socialist model that for a long time was based on high taxes and very high social payments started to stall, and back in 2006, when you, as the head of the Liberal Party, a moderate party that you chaired in 2003, you were elected in parliament back in the 90s, and starting in 2006 to 2014, you were the Prime Minister of Sweden. When then you joined the Alliance for Sweden group as head of your moderate party, and that time your policies were Arbeitsschleinen. Did I pronounce it correctly? Arbeitsschleinen. Is that the way it was characterized? The working line, so to speak, that was based on the moderate approach to the economy, involving more people in labor markets through reducing the benefits, unemployment benefits. I think this is a very brief description of what you did as the Prime Minister, but I should say that your policy was quite successful, primarily when you chaired the government. This period was the period of a crisis, and I should say that after that crisis, most economists started calling Sweden the most sustainable economy and the most successful economy that managed to succeed in recovering the economy after the crisis. It overcame the crisis better than any other European country, as a matter of fact. So, I'm not going to continue describing what you did. You were the president of the European Council. You chaired European politics. This was the last president based on the rotation. You were Sweden chaired that body, so you have had quite a lot of experience of governing both your country and the whole of Europe. And in Europe, you were among the first who raised the question to pursue the what we call green economy, to develop these efforts to combat climate change, something we discuss a lot. And if we had started discussing that a lot earlier, then we could have been a lot more successful when you just started speaking about that. So, back to what I was saying. I'm going to give you the floor and ask you one question. Socialism and capitalism. Which is more successful, and which way should be chosen for European economy? Maybe you know something about us. You can ask us questions about Russia's economy. What do you think may be efficient in ensuring Russia's economy growth? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this important conference, and thank you for the description about my years in Swedish politics. And I think the easy answer is that the most successful model would be capitalism under the rule of law, and with broad incentives for people to work so that you could get an inclusive society, because capitalism on its own tends to make just a few very rich and do not create the kind of inclusiveness. I think it's very important to bring a society together. As you said, we had what we call in Swedish arbetslinjen, a kind of put work first policy that targeted different groups, for instance, youth, elderly people, women, to increase their participation in the labor force, because otherwise a lot of them were actually living on different subsidies for not working. So we had less costs linked to that, but also by increasing their participation rate, we got better public finances and they got a better private economy. This also pushed on consumption, which is a very important part of how we get an economy to grow. I think one thing is very important to say, and that is, of course, true for all countries, even though more true for Sweden than for Russia. And the smaller a country gets, the more important it is to have open markets where you in competition could find a way for your entrepreneurs to grow, because the domestic market will very quickly be too small. And in the case of Russia, where you have a long discussion of how to differentiate your economy out of your great dependence on oil and gas, it's also important that when you try to do that, you do not only rely on a Russian market, because it's always more interesting to be in the international market, in the international competition, to try to grow one's investments. Then it's also easier to attract and accumulate investment money into your economy, which of course is extremely important to keep up growth. So these are some of the things we did during my years, and exactly as you say, I would say that Swedish economy has been extremely stable and prosperous, with great growth figures the latest 15 years.
Well, indeed, these problems are quite relevant, and you pinpointed those problems, including this dependency on raw materials, commodity markets. When you started your tenure, you realized that there was this anti-socialist wave, that you should not create a state where people no longer want to work, when people live on subsidies, on the dole, rather than want to find a job. In this respect, what were the first measures you took? I know that you lowered the social benefits, the dole, the unemployment benefit. What about taxes? Did you do anything with taxes? Should they grow or should they be reduced? What is the proportion between corporate and private taxes? What's your assessment? What's your view on that?
Well, you need to learn about your marginal effects in your economy, and by marginal effects I mean the difference you have in de facto how much money you get into your hand if you compare living on unemployment schemes or different subsidy system compared to a low-income job. Because a lot of the taxation debate in Sweden and many other countries is only concentrating on high-income earners, and therefore you have these flat tax discussions and so on, because you think it increases in productivity. We found out that it's much more interesting to pinpoint low-income earners and understand their marginal effects, because we saw that if there was nearly no difference between living on subsidies, unemployment schemes, compared to have a low-income job, we saw the tendency that people would not accept jobs. They would not move to get a job. They were not as interested to get a job as they otherwise should be. So yes, we lowered the level after a while. We make thresholds or steps down, lowering unemployment payments, and we targeted the tax cuts we did to low and normal income earners. Therefore, we made a great difference. We made it more worthwhile to work, actually, and we did it twice as much for people over the age of 65 to clearly incentivize also older to stay in the workforce for more years. And this, of course, people, especially people with small economies, they tend to answer to these kind of incentives very quickly, because it's a matter of actually putting food on the table, having the ability to pay your rent and things like this. So we saw very quickly positive reactions towards this. And of course, once you're in the labor market, once you have a job, it's easier to reskill to actually get another job. It's very often the problem is that when you've been unemployed for a while, it's harder to get a job, to get back. You lose incentive, you lose attractiveness, and therefore it was so important to have broader representation, many more people in the workforce. And of course, as I said in my first remark, this is also very good for the state economy. The less you actually spend on subsidies for people not working, the more you can put into research and development, into different schemes for better education, which is of course extremely important. So all of this played a major role, I would say, in Sweden. We have also seen it in other countries. And since we have, and Sweden has this, and Russia, it's very clear, a lot of demographical challenges coming to our countries. We see less children born. We have actually, in many parts of the world, decreasing population. It will be even more important to incentivize those in middle life, so to speak, to actually have a job, to be able to also fund all the things we need to do, pensions, elderly care for older people, for instance.
Да, но вы все-таки, хоть и умеренно,
Well, but you are moderately conservative, right? You entered an alliance of other right-wing parties. The social issues, you reduce the dole, the social benefit, thus creating incentives to enter the labor market. I don't know whether you had unemployment back then, but that's incentivized, in a way, people to become employed. What did you do to the other part of the population, those who were creating jobs? What incentives worked in Sweden to attract more investments? You can continue attracting people to the labor market, but if there are no employers, nothing will work. What did you do to that part of the market?
And it's very important to say that, exactly as you said, we were more moderate center-right, more liberal rather than this kind of authoritarian right-wing that we see in some parts of Europe. We took away in 2007 the wealth tax. This is a tax that has been taken away in many countries. And of course, when you don't have a wealth tax and we don't have an inheritance tax, we also reduced taxation on startups. We gave them tax deductions when they were growing their companies in Sweden, taxation effect, and we saw billions of Swedish crowns coming back to the Swedish economy, which has, of course, created an atmosphere of business angels that stand ready to invest in all these tech startups, fintech, medtech, that you will see on the scene in Sweden. And Sweden, as you probably know, is one of per capita highest in the world when it comes to fin and medtech, and also rapidly growing new companies in this sector. So of course it's about capital accumulation. It's about incentivizing also richer people to actually invest in young people with good ideas, and also to have good atmosphere around universities where you stand very incentivizing also them that the things they do at universities should also have support to be commercialized, to become new companies, especially important when it comes to healthcare and the medtech sector. So we did all of this, and it has been working very well. And we have seen it also working similarly in other countries.
да, здесь интересно, что
Yeah, it's quite interesting that when we're talking about healthcare and education, these are the basic components, both for the left and for the right, both for capitalists and socialists, since these are, this is something that the population needs, and this is a foundation for the economy's development, because people should be healthy and they should be ready to work and they should be educated. However, one more question that has to do with the 2008 and 2009. What did you do to stand out?
That we had a banking crash in the early 1990s, and we learned and got a legislation that supported the idea that we did not give a lot of taxpayers' money to the banks when they were in crisis without taking away the shares of the private owners. So we actually got them to pay and to take greater responsibility themselves. And we were the only country in the European Union who did not throw in a lot of taxpayers' money. Most of the countries actually doubled and tripled their national debt during the financial crisis 2008 2009 into 2010, we were the only country in the European Union that lowered our national debt and still has a very low level, down at 40% of GDP, when most of the developed European countries now are at 100% debt level and even more so. So the important experience was not to accept just to give away a lot of tax money to the banks. And we had the legislation and the experience, we knew how to do that. That was the great difference.
Но вы сохранили все банки или часть банков?
But did you manage to keep all the banks, or some of them went bankrupt?
Well, some of them already went bankrupt in the 90s. That was also the experience we had, and they were merged into bigger banks. So that's also different with the banking structure in Sweden, that we had fewer and bigger banks that were therefore also more sustainable. But I should add that after the financial crisis, we have seen in this startup scene that I was discussing, a lot of them are actually financial actors and also banks. So what used to be just a few big banks is now an enormously big markets with a lot of startup banks and financial institutions. So it has come back very clearly, very strongly after the financial crisis. But we were, of course, very helped by the fact that a lot of these mergers and a lot of these not so capitalized banks were gone already in the 90s. That also helped Sweden.
Понятно. У нас есть возможность у панели.
This is clear. The panel can ask a couple of questions, and I want to ask Mr. Arkady Vladimirovich. So here's my question. What do you think about the universal income? Now, I believe it is going backwards from the policy that you were trying to introduce by lowering your unemployment benefits.
You know that not a universal, but a national salary was introduced in Finland, our neighboring country. And it was described as very costly and also taking away incentives for work. As I said, I think that is the wrong pathway, because I think you will increasingly see a large portion of people midlife who do not themselves work, and probably in generations will see their children not working, not choosing to study enough to get to be attractive coming into the labor market. So I do not believe in a universal or national payment, but I do believe, of course, that you should have a social network or a social institutions to help people that don't have a job or are poor. We have very few poor people in that sense in Sweden. So I believe that you have some basic support, but I wouldn't call it a basic salary.
Ну что ж, есть ли еще вопросы?
Are there any more questions? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Frederick. It was very interesting to hear what you have to say, and I believe we'll have a lot of interesting points raised in our further discussion, and we'll try a little bit about politics as well. And we are also trying to promote the idea of moderate conservatism. Maybe we're not as successful as you are in this, but many challenges that we have in Russia are very similar to what you had. And obviously, socialism here was different. The Swedish socialism is different from our socialism. However, I would say the views of many leaders of the country today are oriented to the left. And they don't really take into account what's going to happen with the market economy. So now let's discuss what will happen to the Russian economy. And we will first show you a little presentation, if it's ready. Russia is the 6th largest economy in the world when it comes to the purchasing power. However, we still use a lot of resources to support this place in the economy. And even 2020, the share of raw materials in the export was 51%. The dependency of Russia's resources and Russia's economy can be seen in this graph, and we can see the negative correlation between the raw material price and the ruble rate. There is also a positive correlation with import and with the GDP. The Russian economy critically depends on exporting raw materials and depends on raw materials prices. And when these fall, the ruble is weakening and the imports are falling. And this includes investment because Russia sticks to the policy of low government debt. This leads to the fact that the income is falling and the investment opportunities become fewer. Even before the corona crisis, Russian economy was in the state of stagnation. From 2008 to 2019, Russia's GDP growth was much lower than the average in the world. Therefore, when the GDP fell in 2020, the overall growth from 2008 was 5%. And we do not invest enough compared to other countries that rely on resources. However, Russia has a bigger gold reserve than some European countries, including Germany and Italy, and Russia has 4% of the world's resources. Russia is the 20th when it comes to education. It ranks the 27th when it comes to training and competences in high tech. Russia is also one of the leading digital states, and it is not using its full potential. Our cities rank the best in the world, and some of the technologies that we develop are unique. It is clear that Russia can grow faster than average. There are new trends. There is the sustainable economy and the digital future. All of this involves some risks for the Russian economy. However, we have big opportunities on the other hand, and it is up for us to see, and it depends on us how Russia will use these resources. We need to rethink our policy and become more proactive when it comes to modernization and growth.
Возможности огромные, почему не растем?
The opportunities are plenty, so why is the economy not growing? Now I would like to give the floor. Well, actually, we have one more presentation. That was the wrong one, unfortunately. So now let's play one more presentation. And I believe it has a deeper insight into our discussion, and then we'll discuss it after we play it. According to the experts who were working on the program that's called Growth for Everyone, Russia's economy can grow from 5 to 10% a year. And the strategic analysis of a higher level shows that Russia has investment niches that are not used yet. The biggest question is how to grow. There are different models for economic growth, and today we have a resource-based model that can be characterized as oil in exchange for money. So, simply speaking, we export resources, and with this money, we buy everything that is needed. And in the past, we could just have small corrections in the economy. But the further we go, the more we need systemic change. We need to have a new model for economic growth. We need to move from a resource-based economy to the model that includes competition and private initiatives. We need to develop modern production when it comes to recycling, innovation. And how can we do that? We can choose out of these two options. The first scenario is something that's similar to China. We need to orient at the external market. And it means that we'll have to compete with other countries for a richer consumer. And internally, we'll need to have lower demand. And the second scenario is to grow based on the internal market and high demand within the country. But then we'll have to have higher salaries and higher costs. But how can we get money for paying these higher salaries? First of all, we can grow thanks to labor productivity and new technology and highly productive vacancies. This is how Europe grew after the Second World War, as well as Japan, Singapore, and other countries that managed to get their economy to a higher level. This is a level that is preferable for Russia. This will help us get over our stagnation and will give opportunities for every citizen of the country. We also need to stop lagging behind in productivity, and that will help us raise the living standards for everyone, and also will help give an impetus to private business, education, science, and if we catch up with our productivity and reach a level of a developed country, by 2030 we'll be able to double the GDP and to grow the people's income up to 50%. However, this means that now we don't need to save money, but instead invest it in our proactive approach to stimulate technological growth, to invest together with the business, and to subsidize loans for new investment projects. And we also need to create a new environment that would favor investment, because otherwise investment will be very expensive. That's why we need systemic change in the economic policy of the country. What are these systemic changes? We know exactly what we need to do. We don't need to invent anything new. We just need to follow the best practices of other successful countries. So there are three biggest tips. First of all, it means that we need to take care of systemic change, like taxes, monetary policy, and government regulation. The second tip is to determine our priorities. We need to determine the sectors that are our priorities. And the third tip is that we need to create a state of development. This is a government that motivates growth and speeds up our development. When it comes to systemic decisions, they need to be concentrated on five main objectives. First of all, we need to stimulate demand in the internal market, to make loans and long-term credits more accessible. We also need to introduce a system of smart taxes that would pay the government, but at the same time leave the people enough money to grow and develop businesses. Then we need more fair tariffs for businesses and new customs tariffs that will help us import new technologies instead of goods. Let's discuss all of them. So first of all, we need accessible loans. Now Russia is ranking very low and it's lagging behind other developed economies. That's why the central bank needs to not only provide for macroeconomic stability, but also stimulate growth. For example, to direct its resources and effort to develop a financial system that would not require a loan. We need a new tax structure so that it would favor the new environment. We need to lower the taxes for people by increasing other taxes. We also need to introduce a progressive system, but at the same time, we need to lower our insurance costs. We need a more transparent pricing policy. We need to allow to control income with the price cap system. We also need a new customs policy, from protectionist to a more open customs policies. And it was Dmitry Mendeleev who formulated the tax law that we need to use. We also need to increase our minimum wage to an average European level, and we also need to change our social benefits. We need to give money to those people who actually need it. Second, we need to choose our priority. We need a systemic industrial policy. We need to prioritize cities and regions that have a potential for growth and that would stimulate other industries and the economy as a whole. For example, Germany chose 18 priority areas, China chose 11, and we believe that there should be 8 in Russia. First of all, the things economy. We need to develop not the trade, but the production facilities. Second of all, we need to develop our agriculture. The third plan is that we need to build not high-rises and skyscrapers, but we need to have more mid-sized cities. Fourth of all, we need healthcare that would be accessible, and the private system should be as accessible as the public system. Number 5, we need to export refined materials, for example, not wood, but paper. And number 6, we need sustainable cars, we need eco-friendly airports, and we need to develop better transportation for people and goods. Number 7, developing high-tech, because it's our competitive advantage. And number 8, we need to develop our hospitality industry. It is important that without an effective state, there can be no moving forward. The third point, we need to develop a state of development. All the resources should be used for the growth. For example, the central bank should be responsible for the development of the country, and so has to be the Ministry of Finance and the government. We need to change the ways we protect private ownership. We also need to change our administrative and criminal laws. And the way the government manages the economy is not efficient enough. And we need to use the best practices of other countries. Those who are responsible for development do not have to deal with current problems. They need to be a separate ministry or institution. And in some parts of the world, they are called delivery units or administrations of growth. Such offices were established in almost all the countries who were interested in speeding up the development of their economy. And last but not least, you cannot reach all of these goals without public support. The population should be aware of these reforms and support them, because unless this happens, no change will happen. We know it all too well from our own history. When strategic plans are implemented just for the sake of implementing, this can create a lot of misunderstanding. So this is the program that we have drafted. You might ask us, why have we developed it? What is its main objective? Our answer would be that we need to create a welfare society based on a richer middle class. This will all help raise living standards and bridge the income gap and create a community for development that would be safe, that would have good income, and that would be striving for change and development. This is something that we have been aiming at for a while. However, due to some mistakes in the past, we haven't managed to reach this goal yet. Thank you very much.
Это взгляд Института экономики роста.
So this is the Stolypin Institute of Economy and Growth. We have been elaborating that with the participation of economists and other specialists. Was there anything else coming? A different view. Well, we have been developing that approach for a while now. We used to have a strategy of growth document that we discussed at the Economic Council of the President, and we discussed it twice. Something was implemented, but still the country has chosen a different way. The way that was chosen many years ago, the way of very tough monetary policy. And today we would like to discuss with people embracing different views on the basis of the presentation you've just seen. So what's the correct way? Are we thinking in the right way? To discuss this way with those who elaborated the program, which is now called the new version of Growth for Everyone, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Mirkin, who is going to join us online. Mr. Mirkin, are you there? Well, there is no sound. Switch on the mic, please. Good afternoon. I would like to share my screen with you. Can we do that? Is it going to take you up long? No, just about 7 minutes. Well, let's give it a try. Just give me the right to share my screen with you. Well, okay, now, here we go. Can you see my presentation now? So, which model of economy does Russia need? That's the same question. We all know the external challenges Russia faces, the stagnation in technologies, the longevity, external these statistics. It shows that not very many Russians can afford lots of things, and we all know very well that only 1 or 2% of Russia's assets, Russian families, have enough money to live on. We went through several crises, several pension reforms, several devaluations, and in such countries as Russia oftentimes face crises. All of these are challenges. As a result, we continue to have leftist views in our society, collectivist psychology, where people support the state. 65% of people believe that it's necessary to strengthen the role of the state. 28 are in favor of the lowest possible intervention from the state. 96% believe that the state must take care of everyone. 68% believe that Russia needs a hard hand, so to speak. 44% believe that socialism means order, whereas capitalism means the power of the few, and so on and so forth. 17% want Russia to have socialism Swedish style. 11% want to have Chinese type of socialism. These are the statistics provided by relevant bodies, which basically means that when speaking about the future model of Russia's economy, we have certain things to take into account. Society supports leftist views. What do we see in parties' programs? This has been reflected in election 2021. 4 major parties have a lot of items related to adding something, increasing, lowering, and things like that in their manifestos. Everything rotates around the budget, so to speak. How much money is necessary, no one knows. And we should understand that this model is very limited in scope because the budget cannot last forever. There are certain limitations to it. We need to ensure investment growth. 20-21% of GDP is the level of our investment, and we need to change that. We need to invest in our defense and so on. But as I have said, our budget isn't bottomless. If we look at this collectivist leftist views of the 4 parties I've mentioned, what kind of economy are we in for? We're likely to have the Latin American model, corporate Russia, corporate state, oligopoly, where the state will account for 80-85% of the entire economy. Let me remind you that the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service says it's about 70-75% of the economy. And we, instead of economy of incentives, we have the economy of supervision. We like supervising, controlling things. And as a matter of fact, this approach of monopolies, of increased public participation, state participation, predetermines stagnation, because a human being at the bottom is someone who who wants something to eat, who wants to eat something, taking advantage of major corporations. If we speak of those major parties I've mentioned, there are 2 parties that call for the nationalization of several industries, the control of capital flows, and many others. We believe that such an economy is something that is in store for us. We can guarantee then we will end up having the economy that will be similar to that of the 1930s, with a very low share of the private market. When we need to support our businesses. But there is not a single case in the history of the world when there are effective economies like that. They are sure to lag behind market economies when it is based on limited people with no incentives to grow. This approaches rather, that are shaped by the social institutions based on leftist views. It gives It makes it difficult to forecast how the situation will change. We have non-systemic liberal parties And they cannot be called right parties. They are leftist liberals, as a matter of fact, who respond to the leftist mindset of society. Let's call a spade a spade. It's important to understand where we stand. If we sum things up, their views, we are talking about social liberal economy, the continental model of Germany, Spain, after all, and some other countries, maybe to a lesser extent the economy of France and Italy. This is not the Anglo-Saxon model. We understand that New York, London, is something that is hard to achieve for us. I mean, the level of those countries. Only 9% of the population are prepared for that. This is not a Swedish model, because the Swedish model, even in that simplified view, there are too many taxes, and given such taxes, we will be unable to ensure growth. This is not a Chinese model either. This is the model of economy based on the social market economy. And when the share of the state is huge, 10 to 20%, there are a lot of SMEs. Germany, Italy are developing along the same lines. The social guarantees are out there. They're quite numerous, but everything depends on the internal demand. And let me reiterate it. We should call a spade a spade. We should understand what our goals are. The social market economy with the economy of development, this is not a miracle, and the task that we all have to address should be expressed using Ludwig Erhard's words. We should make the economy identify the energy and achievement in productivity to make sure that people can live without need, have the ability to purchase what they want to purchase, and thus become independent. So this is the middle class that we need to have. They should have these opportunities to fulfill their potentials. Only then will they be able to be independent of the mercy of the state, as a matter of fact. This is a dream, something that can hopefully is attainable. We don't have many chances to end up in such an economy, very few chances. But I still hope that this is a dream that can be our guiding principle. Thank you. We'll continue discussing the chances later on. Who is against that proposal or such views? Is there anyone against? No one. Mr. Merkin, no one is against that. Now allow me to give the floor to Mr. Dvarkovich. We have witnessed a lot over the past years, competing views related to high monetary policies, tough monetary policies. Why do we focus on the budget of the state as something that is of utmost importance? We're not taking into account businesses, households. Why are we focusing on the state only? The first stage was quite successful, I believe, until the year 2008, when we were trying to overcome the crisis. There was this over-crisis policy that was aimed at putting things together, controlling the budget, the financial flows, the macroeconomic indicators were important. Why haven't we changed things? Why the monetary policy has continued to be tough over the years? Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here today. I believe that there is a combination of the historic reasons mentioned by Mr. Merkin. The situational effect is related to particular historical events of the years and the structure of our authority and society as a whole, including the economy of the country. I'm not going to focus on the history of the matter, on the historical background, even though before this plenary session I read a draft project of the school I finished, and everything is built on the collective spirit, and there is no chance for a student to be raised in a different mindset, the chances are minimal. It's not about individual initiatives, it's all about the collective spirit. This is not my evaluation of the situation, this is just a fact. One of the principles includes a lack of competition between classes and students. So this is the founding principle. We shouldn't foster competitiveness. What can we be speaking then about if we speak about the cultural aspect of things? Every reasonable person will be in favor of combining competitiveness and the collective approaches, collective spirit, collective mindset, and friendship, rather than putting something at a premium. When speaking about history, we should recall 2008, the financial crisis, and the Georgian War. The year 2014 is also important, and everything related to Crimea. So these are two most important situations that drove us to hope, to this desire to mobilize the existing finances to address the tasks we faced, including the 10-year program of modernizing the army over the years 2010-2020, and certainly those resources were later inevitably distracted from other avenues of our activities that could have been more important in the absence of those circumstances. The reserves dramatically diminished by 35% back then, and I shall recall this was caused by the inability to let the exchange rate go. Otherwise, that will result in the disruption of the banking system. If we speak about the years 2014 and 15, we risked liberating the exchange rate and didn't have to spend our reserves because the banks were stable enough to sustain the challenges, to withstand the challenges. As for the question you ask, why don't we continue taking risks? What prevents us from taking risks when everything is okay, when there is a solid foundation, when the reserves exceed the minimum necessary level? Why do we continue investing in major public-supported, state-supported projects rather than stimulating entrepreneurship activities through different tools? The answer is simple. My answer is, maybe there are other answers to that, because this is the structure of interests in the power that is supported by society largely, as we have just seen. Most decisions taken, this is something I spoke about many years ago, most decisions are taken by a limited number of people, heads of the authorities, the heads of the country, heads of major companies and major banks, and one private bank on top of that. It's not important whether they're private or public. The question, more important, is that they are very few. So decisions in our economy are taken by this limited number of people. A lot depends on the purposes we pursue, and our purposes in programs is to develop entrepreneurship activity, but this is not something we see in reality. In Sweden, they managed to do that. They removed the wealth taxes, incentivizing business angels, which improve the situation. It may take us 5 to 4%, no more, which means that this is an easy thing to achieve. And we will witness an explosive growth of investments and the number of new projects. We could identify the focus projects, flagship projects related to medicine, education, digitalization in all areas of our economy, ensuring cybersecurity, certainly. Looking at my colleagues on my left who are in charge of that, we can identify those focuses, and they are easy to understand for the rest of the world. AI, digitalization, additive technologies, quantum technologies, new materials, all of these are easy to understand. And this is something that will penetrate all the areas of our lives. And if we continue to incentivize people active in those areas, we will succeed. I have no doubts at all. But this is something we are not doing. Even the 5% of resources are not allocated for those purposes. Starting with science, R&D that is underfinanced, underfunded, to other elements of innovative chain. This is something we have enshrined in our documents, but this is something that is not implemented in real life. It's no use arguing with the documents that we work out. What we need is to make people act. I don't want to speak about politics. I'm not a politician. I've always been a professional economist in the administration, in the executive office of the president. I'm not going to speak about party matters, party affairs. This is up to you to promote this in parliament. But what I can tell you is that this is something we desperately need. Too bad we're failing in this area, but I think I can say we're quite successful in developing our parties. Our ideas are not supported, as Mr. Merkin just said. It's partly because our society supports other types of ideas. Mr. Buxman, prosecutors supervise. Many blame law enforcement bodies, our judicial system, for creating barriers to developing our business. But I believe that the public prosecutor's function has been deprived of many functions, including that related to investigation. In your view, we see that the public prosecutor keeps working in order to ensure the support of businesses, in order to protect the interests of businesses. But we can't say we're quite successful because there is this mass at the bottom that in many respects is against those movements, pursuing their own private interests. Oftentimes, this might be interest related to certain ideologies. They just don't like businesses, maybe. That's why many investigators, law enforcement bodies act against businesses, so to speak, in a way. If I can ask you a question related to that, what's your view as the public prosecutor? What are the ways to address the problem?
Thank you very much for your question. It's not the first time I've taken part in an economic forum, and obviously I'm a lawyer in economics, and maybe I'm not an expert in the economy. However, my institution is trying to protect business. You were saying that the prosecutor's office was deprived of some functions. However, I'm a lawyer in the prosecutor's office, and I believe that it's good that we were deprived of some of our functions, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to complete all of our missions. It would be hard for us to protect businesses if we also had to prosecute them. And we already have a good tradition. We've got a lot of expertise in protecting business from illegal intervention. In particular, for the 9th year in a row, we've had a working group together with the Commissioner for Human Rights, and this work can have practical results and political results. We have practical discussions. We discuss practical cases, some criminal cases, and we managed to acquit 34 businessmen, and the trials against them, the charges were dropped. And also, we are working with the digital platform where businessmen can complain. This is something new for us, but we believe that this area is growing and it's becoming more and more popular with businessmen. It is more popular with them because there is a certain fast-tracked method of investigating their complaints. And the central law enforcement agencies can respond to businessmen faster. Now I'm talking about the General Prosecutor's Office. They can respond to them. Then there is also a hotline with businessmen. If we're talking about numbers, as far as 2021 goes, the prosecutors have influenced 141,000 violations of businessmen's rights. This is quite a number, isn't it? And one of the areas of our work is the legality of laws. We're talking about the federal level and we're talking about the regional level as well. There can be some rare violations of federal law, but regional laws are often violated. So we need to focus more on local laws. And we managed to get rid of some laws that prevented businesses from developing. We used our powers to change these laws, and some of them were abolished. I'm not going to give you any examples and dwell on the details because there are many, and we have special prosecutors who work in the regions. During the pandemic, we had to make sure that we have support for small and medium-sized businesses. That includes financial help from the budget, tax benefits, and helping businesses with rent. And there were tens of thousands of people who helped businesses and made the resources for them more accessible. Every day, we make services accessible to the population and business. In particular, I'm talking about the fact that public services should be carried out online. We took some measures to protect our entrepreneurs and to make the services for them more accessible. And we defended their interests in more than 1,000 cases. Several years we've been trying to pay for the municipal and state level in different regions. And $18 billion were paid that were specified in such types of contracts. It is only this year. And all of this gave our businesses an opportunity to grow, to pay their salaries, and to have some profits for themselves as well. We're also trying to deal with investors, and we're dealing with the constitutional agreements, because there is some more work for us prosecutors to do there. And I believe one important area of our work is also, well, we are trying to not let supervisory bodies intervene into businesses' activities. And first of all, I'm talking about prevention of illegal checkups. Prosecutors denied 6,500 control measures out of 20,000 that were proposed. So basically, 1 out of 3 checkups was denied. And in some regions, around 50% of some of these examinations and checkups were denied. To help our plan work, we need to draft a plan. We need to draft a plan for such procedures. And overall, we need to make sure that we deny some of those that were not planned. And in our case, it was 1/4 of them. We also need to control the risks and the risk-oriented approach. We've been doing it for several years now. And we've been working with the Russian Agricultural Administration and other organizations, and we're asking them to prevent illegal planning of such investigations of business. I believe that we've initiated some procedures that were even hard to believe about 10 years ago, that the prosecutor's office actually introduced a moratorium on investigations of small businesses, and this plan was approved, and now we already have it official, so the document about this moratorium has been signed. In the first 6 months, we've had 436 investigations that were illegal according to the moratorium. And the foundation for such investigations were anonymous messages when some people wanted to get rid of their competitors or had other shady purposes. One of the biggest violations of this law was also conducted. About 1,500 people were prosecuted by the prosecutor's office, and they have received their administrative punishments. Now we have a new law about the state and municipal control, and the prosecutor's office has been an active member in the commission that drafted the law. And we have managed to improve our law enforcement potential. So now a businessman can be visited by someone who's doing an investigation only with the agreement of a prosecutor. Also, any investigation of a business needs to be listed in a special list of such events that we have. We've drafted this list, and we've been working on this list every day. We have this register for investigations, and this is a very important database that we have for the whole country, and this is how those who investigate can work together with the prosecutors. I believe that we're on the right way, and we are ready to protect the businesses as far as the law allows us, and as far as the authority of our prosecutors allows us. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We've been working together for many years, it's true, and we're now aimed at getting a result together, and we have certain areas that we're working on. However, we prioritize our supervisory activities, and I'm certain that we've already made the first steps. And I believe that we'll be able to work out a program that will be efficient and will be able to get rid of pressure for at least some part of it. So thank you very much. I would like to mention once again that there is a problem of both administrative and criminal pressure on the business. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Bobkin. We're going to talk about machinery and machine building. Recently, I visited the city of Rostov and the facility that's called Rosselmash. It is a very big enterprise, and it is clear that we've inherited this factory from the Soviet Union. And there is a lot of concrete there, and all the infrastructure costs a lot. But at the same time, they managed to produce a lot of very modern machinery, and they managed to restore their share in the Russian market. However, I believe that the Soviet Union produced about 5 times more of certain machines. So these are very important investment skills, and
которые занимались этой работой.
this is obviously very professional of those people who deal with investment there. So socialism or capitalism, what do you think? You've got an incredible number of people, around 13,000. So do you support social subsidies or do you support competition between the employees? Do you have incentives for them, either financial or moral? So are you rooting for competition or being a good guy? Thank you so much for your visit. Here's the newspaper that we're publishing in our factory, and we can see that you're on the cover. The party of business has a very similar ideology to what you do. In the presentations, they mentioned that Russia's potential is enormous. And then the speakers also highlighted that the Russian people is satisfied with the country's state, with the state of the country, and they don't want major changes. As for me, I agree with the Russian people, and I'm leaning towards socialism. But at the same time, I'm looking for an opportunity to develop. That's why I would like both more socialism and more capitalism in this country. I believe it's unfair that the poor pay a bigger share of taxes than the rich, and I mean income tax. And in this regard, I would like to root for more socialism. Many people see here, and Mr. Dvorkovich mentioned it, that the economic policy is formed by those and in favor of those who own resources. We export more and more raw materials and resources. However, you can see that there are some towns that export these resources, and the cities are in a bad state. So developing the resource base does not lead to developing the non-resource based economy. For example, we inside the country have more expensive metals than the prices that we export for. Our gasoline is more expensive than it is in Kazakhstan. So I would like the government to take a more active role in this regard, and this means more socialism. But at the same time, I would like to see more capitalism. I would like freer conditions for entrepreneurs, for those who do agriculture, and I would like the government to let people show their creativity, to let them earn more. And I'm talking about private business. They can build machines, they can bake bread, they can produce any other goods. And here I can see a contradiction to the government's policy. The government does not improve the conditions of non-resource-based companies. We can see that obviously the profit of the budget is quite high, and the National Welfare Foundation has 14 trillion rubles, and in August alone, it received more than 260 billion. I believe that the taxes in Russia are too high, and the government does not use this money. And I would like the taxes for entrepreneurs to be lowered. So in this regard, I would like more capitalism and more private entrepreneurship. And I believe that the monetary policy is only aimed at keeping inflation at around 4%. I believe that this monetary policy is not exactly the right one. I would like to have more loans for entrepreneurs as well and more capitalism this way. Sometimes the government takes correct measures. For example, in agricultural machinery, there was a program that subsidized farmers and they could buy Russian machinery. And this program led to the fact that there was a higher competition for those factories that build machines in comparison with our foreign colleagues. And in 5 years, this area grew 5 times, and the export grew 4 times, and we created thousands of jobs. Ross-Cell Marshall factory is developing, and even though we're quite big, we're thinking of building new factories because the old one's not enough. And all of the factories that we have, all of the agricultural machinery factories, and there are around 60 of them, they are all growing thanks to that program. They are increasing salaries, and today, when we have the deficit of the budget, and there is a lot of money in the budget, even though we have all of these conditions, this program was not funded, and it was suspended. Again, agricultural machinery has become more expensive, and I believe we will see a dip in production. I don't think that this decision is logical. We could continue the success of this program and create such a program for other areas and other industries. But instead of this, the government is now preventing itself from earning money. So we need both competition and private entrepreneurship, but at the same time, we need the government to take an active role and support the weaker businesses, support those who already have a good position in the market. We don't need to have this contradiction. Our country has great potential, and while we're doing that, we can also face and address some social challenges. We need to give people work, because if they don't have a job, for example, they don't want to have children because they don't see the future for them. However, if we have lower taxes and cheaper loans, and if we give entrepreneurs the freedom to operate in the market, it will attract more people. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now let's move on to a different topic and talk about people. We've got Ms. Bezuglova here. Ksenia, can you hear us? Ksenia is still in the hospital? Oh, I'm here. It's probably not easy for you to have a video conference from there. But have you heard what the previous speaker talked about finding the middle ground between capitalism and socialism? What do you think? You represent very big communities, and you work with people directly. You work on the grounds, and you're among the people the whole time. So what do people think? Do they need subsidies, or do they need jobs? Do they want fish or a fishing rod? So what is your take?
Thank you, Mr. Titov. Good afternoon, dear participants and guests of the forum. Well, we have gone through the entire country, communicating with people on the ground, indeed, with people in various towns and cities, with entrepreneurs and common people, and the answer is clear. People need capitalism with a human touch, an economy based on a private initiative, on the responsibility of citizens. They need transparency and communication. They also need trust on the part of the state. This will give social results, and the growing tax base will provide an incentive for the growth of various social programs. What we see today is that people are depressed because they have experienced lack of communication and lack of trust, infinite control on the part of the state, squeezing tightening the belt. So that what they need is this capitalism with a human touch, with an understanding that any economic sector, any participant of any sector of the economy will understand how successful our policies are, depending on how well he or she lives. Are you going to pursue this point of view in the State Duma? Are you going to uphold it? That's the reason why I'm trying to get elected. And I'm a mother of many children, and I have certain disabilities, and I know only too well how difficult it is to live for a common person and what it takes, what it's necessary to do to make sure that country started developing, for people not to feel depressed. No matter who you talk to, you will always find such sentiments. I want people to live with dignity. I want people to love their country. I want people to feel that the state needs them, that the state takes care of them, and that they matter for the state. Thank you very much indeed. Ksenia's fund is entitled Everything is Possible, and I hope that creating a new economy is also possible in Russia, Ksenia, and the society you described is also something that we can arrive at. So thank you, Ms. Bezuglova. Sergey, would you like to join us and answer a couple of questions? Will you join us on the panel? Now I would like to ask Vladislav Inozemtsev. At our very first stage, when we were analyzing our views on the economy, we agreed with almost everything. We saw eye to eye on almost everything. To be frank, well, you can speak about the general picture, the bigger picture, but I have a more specific question, if I may. Among the proposals related to the tariffs, the taxation, the monetary policies, we also had a question of economic governance. And this issue of the delivery unit, it was used in many countries under various guises, and yet the idea is the same, to separate the governance of development and separate it from governing the current affairs, current economic affairs. We should separate these two issues. We should have people in charge of the future, managers that would work and think about the future rather than thinking the problems of today. So this part of development, why do you think we never follow that route? And in your view, how should we govern economy? Well, thank you very much, Mr. Titov. Thank you for having me here. I don't think that we now disagree on many things, just the other way around. I listened with great interest to what has been said, and I'm ready to support many ideas. Most of all, I'd like to focus on the ideas voiced by Mr. Merkin, that Russia is a country with widespread poverty, which is indeed a serious problem, and our success of the noughties, the development from 2000-2007, was mainly explained directly by the proceeds from oil trade. This was the original reason, but more importantly, the real income of the population kept growing over that period of time, which pushed the competitiveness of economic sectors. We look at what sectors ensured GDP growth from 2000 to the year 2007. 74% accounted for the banking, insurance, construction, services, internet, communications, retail trade, wholesale trade, hospitality. So these were the most competitive sectors. And when the population got money, the population spent their money, which actually boosted the economic growth. And we feel that. And the sluggish growth was explained not by certain individual failures or miscalculations, which were important still, but above all, this can be explained by the fact that we exhausted the opportunities for future growth. This was related to fiscal policies, this was related to the demotivation of economic growth, and many other aspects. And if we spend speak about the immediate reason was that there was no growth of income. They can grow by a certain percent after the pandemic, but on the whole, I see no opportunity to kickstart the growth based on this widespread development of economy based on or conditioned by the growth of people's income. I'm quite skeptical about this opportunity of a breakthrough in certain sectors. What we keep reading in newspapers are just attempts to address individual issues. Kudrin started speaking about new privatization, which is just a palliative measure. Public-owned companies in the market can be quite competitive. Let's talk about Sberbank. Others spoke about other points of growth. Individual points of growth. Kudrin spoke about new iPhone, for instance, that we need to export. Nothing of the kind. Not a single private company can drive such a huge country as Russia, with a population of 150 million people, and will not allow it to grow sustainably. Instead of identifying individual points of growth, we should make sure that the growth of people's incomes continue to grow. We should increase mildly the public debt, something that is done by many developed countries. The pandemic years gave us lots of lessons to learn, and this is something we should do. We should learn those lessons. We should act in the same vein to make sure that this is something that people should get. People should get this money rather than new innovative technologies or companies. People should get that money, and people should, by investing their money, they should ensure the growth of certain sectors. This is the approach that is likely to succeed. We discussed this with Mr. Titov many years ago, that we need a broader industrialization that should start with the development of consumer-oriented sectors, and then major companies that can find their place in those niches, they will get more competitive advantages. I'm not going to elaborate on that. The income of the population should grow, and all the impediments to that should be eliminated. I don't quite understand why we are unwilling to raise the pensions of working pensioners. We should eliminate the freezing of the cumulative part of the pension, and we should raise the public debt by 2 or 3% of GDP a year without investing it in major companies where they will simply be diluted. This will ensure economic growth. A second element to be mentioned is the income tax. We speak about the progressive income tax, forgetting that in the United States, which is one of the most successful economies, 61% of the population did not pay income tax at all, which is an important issue as well. From my point of view, nothing can be more important than the elimination of the income tax of incomes lower than 60 to 70,000 rubles, which would actually boost consumption. From my point of view, we can come up with other ideas of development, but let me reiterate this once again. In answering Boris Titov's question, I'm quite skeptical about the opportunity of identifying breakthrough industries or sectors. This is something we have had many times. Let's recall Medvedev's modernization. Since perestroika, we have kept speaking about points of growth, and we have ended up having no points of growth at all. Let's talk about Medvedev's attempt to boost space industry, but now we're even behind China. So once again, to ensure that reforms are supported by the population, for society to trust the authorities, we need to look at people's needs, and we should understand that the reserves are good, certainly, but the level of people's well-being is much better. I'm not going to speak about various economic indicators. External reserves account for 58% of our central bank, whereas when it comes to the European Central Bank, they amount to 0. They are quite proactive, unlike our central bank. Thus, The question is not in how we should do things, but who should we turn into the agents of economic changes. And it should be people rather than major enterprises. You didn't say anything about the delivery unit. We'll go back to that shortly. The question to you, if I may. Perfect. Let's give out money. Let's turn people into agents of reforms. But Ms. Nabiulina will start raising the question of inflations. The money given to the people will be consumed by inflation. Well, indeed, this is a good question, but we should understand that there are two answers. The first one is that there are many entrepreneurs, many statesmen here. Dear colleagues, what was the inflation average from 2001 to 2007 in the Russian Federation? 8 to 9%. What was the economic growth? 6.5% minimum. What are we trying to gain? What are we striving to achieve? Are we aiming at growth or aiming at stable prices? Inflation is not something we should be afraid of. In our situation, this is not the absolute evil. We should strike the right balance between the inflation and development. Secondly, let me reiterate that our current situation is drastically different from what we had in the beginning of the noughties. It was dollarized, it was dollar-based. Any exchange rate growth resulted in higher prices. On the other hand, it's important to know the fact that back then we saw a dramatic growth of social inequality in Russia. Dramatic growth of number of rich people. My idea is different. The money that the state should borrow from people should be directed above all to the low-income people, ordinary people, pensioners, retirees, people who would support consumption, demand for the local production rather than imported goods. Something manufactured here. I must ask you one question. Shall we give out fish or fishing rods? Mr. Titov, we will do both. There are many people who don't need fishing rods. We have fishing rods of pensioners who keep working. They have to work because they don't have enough money. And what signal do they get? They are refused higher pensions if they continue working. Why don't we want to change the situation? Why don't we want to eliminate the income tax, even for those who earn less than the living standards? Why can't we help our economy grow in that way? Well, thank you very much, Mr. Dvorkovich. Just a brief intervention, a brief remark, if I may. Growing incomes in 2001-2008 followed low taxation rates, dramatic rates. Value-added tax, commodities tax, all taxes at the same time, simultaneously, and this massive of money was released, the potential money. Many taxes were not paid anyways. This gray zone did exist. Were now taken into account by statistics, and that boosted consumption. And these were driven by a dramatic lowering of tax rates. How can we do it now? As you say, through the elimination of income tax for low-income citizens or otherwise. This is a very serious question to discuss. We need statistics and calculations. I'm convinced this is something we can do one way or another, and this is something we cannot do without. And my second comment, if I may, since I worked after 2008, I don't want to comment on the space-related issues, but still, two sectors were quite successful. Nuclear energy, where we are among the global leaders and demonstrate rapid growth and quite successful, and we built more power plants than others. And then agriculture, that back then witnessed a lot of investments that served as important investment incentives, which actually affected adjacent areas, including, for instance, harvesting machinery building. So let's now move and discuss agriculture. Mr. Semyonov, Belaya Dacha, one of the most vibrantly developing agricultural holdings. They do not only grow things, but they also produce the biggest producer of lettuce, I think, in Europe, of potatoes, a huge agricultural company, and Mr. Semyonov also has had some experience in addressing agricultural issues as a minister of agriculture. So from a different side of the barricade, so to speak. Mr. Semyonov, you have the floor. Thank you. Mr. Titov, I'd like to stress that developing agriculture since 1999, we see that the agricultural sector has been developing quite well. But I would like to support Vladislav. We need both fish and fishing rod. We shouldn't run into extremes. For 20 years, we have been saying that we need to go back to the practices when people with low incomes, who even have to pay income taxes. Let's give these people food stamps, for instance, giving them an opportunity to buy local produce. Don't give them the money. Give them this opportunity to buy foodstuffs, groceries, thus support their family, and at the same time support our agriculture. But I could now speak about certain positive trends in agriculture, and there is something to discuss. But now I'd like to lower our expectations by focusing on a different thing. What are the factors, what are the growth factors are out there? Mr. Dvorkovich was right to say that we started investing in agriculture back in 2005 when we launched nationwide projects. I don't know what we would be doing now. How could we have responded to the embargoes and sanctions without those policies? This was done back then. The range of measures is now broader. Let's look at the competitiveness. The local, the internal and external competitiveness. How can we ensure it? It's not done thanks to the budgetary funding. Budget is important. At the heart of it is devaluation. Let's look at 1998. And don't forget about growing prices at the external market. This is the factor of today. Devaluation is what mattered back then. And both factors are narrowing zero. If we continue to ensure continued growth of agriculture, even today, we should understand that budgetary funding is not sufficient. What do we do next? Should we move towards devaluation now? That's not the best idea, but how can we achieve competitiveness? How can we prolong this competitiveness and develop it? Only grains are competitive in the external market. How can this be accounted for? Because the village is very poor. Our major competitive advantage is that peasants receive a very low wage. The income is very low.
And again, Mr. Dvorkovich raised this question, how can we make this decision? Monopolizing infrastructure is something that prevents us from developing the agricultural sector. And again, this is something that has been mentioned today. When we're talking about supervisory procedures, we've also discussed that. Let's have a look at the transport infrastructure. Take ports, for example. When we're talking about loading grain, it was $37 per ton, and today it is 14. However, in the Mexican Gulf, it's around $9 to $12, and this difference is quite significant. When we're talking about railroads, the tariffs are 15 to 20% lower than for our partners. But we're only talking about tariffs. If we're discussing sub-tariffs, and if we're taking all of the payments together, then the overall payment is about 15 to 20% higher than that of our competitors. Why does that happen? When we're talking about grain transportation, all of the cars belong to one company. This is where the anti-monopoly agency needs to do its work. They react very quickly when the prices for bread are growing, when, for example, the price for a piece of bread is growing 5%. But the anti-monopoly service does not see it, that all the transport for transporting grain belongs to one company. Our transport is twice as expensive as for other countries because the cars that transport grain in the US and Canada are bigger. Grain carriers cannot manage with our roads. That's what they say in Russia. But how can we develop export then? In some areas, we're still competitive because our villagers are poor, but we're actually exacerbating the situation, and there are more and more hurdles for our farmers. Today, someone has mentioned a very liberal idea, for example, getting rid of cross subsidies. And so, what do we have today? Farmers pay twice as much for energy. And if we're talking about small and medium-sized businesses, they pay even more. So they speak about one thing and then they do another. We still have enormous potential. The economists say that we have a share of about 20% in the world's grain market, but I believe that we can easily reach 30. Let's look at China. We're only exporting a little bit of meat and milk there. Well, now we're in the midst of a pandemic and there are huge lines of trucks. It is true, but we need to get rid of obstacles, because otherwise the growth areas that we have now will no longer be there and won't be able to support competition. I would also like to discuss what there was in the video. They talked a lot about farmers, and I would not like to repeat our mistakes from the 1990s. I believe that our holdings need to help farmers develop. That 70% of our raw materials, we give it to farmers. The same happens with lettuce and potatoes. We give them to farmers. And we make 30% ourselves just to keep the enterprise stable. So we don't need to make big companies and farmers face each other. Our agricultural sector needs to be represented both big holdings and small farmers. Now is the time to develop little farming enterprises, because such times like this are not very good for developing bigger holdings. We also discussed demographic programs, that we need to have more people, and we don't even have 150 million. So here's the plan. Every child born in a city usually means that inside the family the income is growing twice. But if it is a farmer's family, every child means that their welfare is going to increase. This is what happened during the times of Stolypin, and nowadays we're in the Stolypin Forum. So this trend still remains, so I believe that we should develop everything this way. So there are a lot of problems in agriculture, and we need to develop farming enterprises. So now I would like to ask Mr. Sorokin. In agriculture, there are plenty of problems. So what about other areas? What if we talk about the areas where we're not developing fast enough? Can you hear us, Vadim? I can hear you. Thank you very much. So what do we need to do in order to develop successful projects like Gazelle? And I know that you've got a big share of the market and you returned a big share of the market, but what are the problems for bigger technological enterprises? I believe that in 2009 we lost a share of the market when it comes to cars, and our share was at 20%. And nowadays we got the share back, and the share is about 60% for commercial cars. And I believe it comes to about 75% when it comes to medium-sized cars, and 80% of transportation is carried out by the cars produced in our company. Talking about potential growth areas, I would mention two directions. The first one is to develop our exports, and the second one is to develop our technology. We have quite a big share of market, and we are limited when it comes to opportunities for growth, but there are good examples in China and Japan. In these countries, the policy was to develop export at any cost. Let's imagine that our country does not have oil and gas or any other resources. Believe me, if that was the case, the government would subsidize any exports. I remember the times when China only started developing its export. For example, aluminum spare parts for a car. You could buy it at a very high price. And the difference between the price and the cost was paid for by the government. But they organized the production of these aluminum discs. And thanks to this production, they managed to develop more spare parts. And nowadays, you cannot pay $5 for that aluminum disc. You will pay its real price. The model that exists today is oriented at the internal market. And if it happens this way, it doesn't lead to any competitiveness of this model. Now, in Russia, the share of the automobile industry decreased, and the segment of the market of light cars is limited by 94,000 cars a year. And we don't really have any hopes that the situation will change. And when it comes to commercial cars, there is a very simple formula: 0.6% of the GDP. So if the GDP grows 10% in 2022, then we can count that the consumption of and the purchases of commercial cars will increase 6%. But we know that this growth will not happen. And this growth will not even account for 5%. We've already reached a certain limit, and this limit now is a brake on our development. We're trying to develop our exports, and about 20% of our income now comes from abroad. What's also interesting is that the government announced some subsidies for green transport, and we understand that if we only work for our internal demand, these will be the most expensive cars and spare parts. We need to change our development model, and we need to grow our export share. it needs to grow at least 1.5 or 2 times. And if this happens, then it will help us pay for the changes that we're going through. And I would also like to draw attention to utilization fees. The less localized it is, the higher is the budget, and the higher the budget is in a certain ministry. Today we have a competitive goods, and in Moscow you can see now there are exhibitions of cars, and all of these cars are competitive. And we do not really develop cars or a certain model of a car unless we're sure that it will sell abroad. And if we're sure that we'll sell it abroad, we're sure that we're going to sell it within the country, inside the country. And when we're talking about the government and ask about increasing the volume of export, the ministries do not even have a formula to count the influence of this on the budget. But unless we compete in the foreign markets, the producers will not have any motivation for growth. And this will get us all back to the Soviet Union. The second direction I was talking about is the technological vector. Car making is based on certain prospects and on certain visions that are dictated by the government. And it's important not to change these visions halfway. Several years ago, there was a course for gas-based transport and cars. I believe that it was bound to fail. When we're talking about fuel consumption, I believe that gas-based cars are the least expensive. So if we have the same fuel efficiency as our European partners do, and they have reached quite a lot of success in it. So if we manage to reach the same efficiency per kilometer, then I believe we will have a lot of opportunity for growth. And therefore, when we have more expensive transport, we will have more expensive goods. So now the course is for electric cars and hydrogen cars. So what is the goal? Are we going to be carbon neutral? We're only talking about being carbon neutral by 2030, and that only includes 10% of the industry. I could give you an example from 1994, the Gorkov car factory. There was about 1,900,000 commercial Gazelle cars, and they are still there, they're still working. So more than 50% of those cars were Euro 2, and about 20% of them were Euro 3, and now we have Euro 5. Now we need to develop what we actually need to renew our car parks, and then we need to work on our further potential. Let's have a look at the forecast published in Germany. Let's say internal combustion engine accounts for 1 unit. A hydrogen car would be 9 units. So it will be 9 times as expensive. Who's going to pay for that? Let's have a look at the reality. Let's have a bus that's 12 meters long. It costs 12 million rubles. And it can transport 120 people. As for an electric bus, let's say it costs 36 million and it transports 120 people. It means that one passenger place costs 300,000 rubles. A hydrogen car costs 100,000 and it transports 120 people, and it means that each passenger will pay 830,000 rubles. Who's willing to pay for that? Such transport cannot be developed without the government's support, and that's why the spare parts for such transports are very expensive. And we're not going to produce a big number of such cars or buses. So we need to find ways, and we need to find more effective solutions for lowering the emissions of transport, but at the same time, we need to learn how to use hydrogen as a source of energy, because otherwise, let's say we'll stop producing screw engines in the next 10 years, we will still have a problem with the environment and nothing will change. Because everything that was produced by the people for the last 120 years, it took a certain amount of time. I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for a bit. I just wanted to add something. In the program that we have here, we have a certain scenario for our event, and one of the priorities is mobility. And having analyzed that, when it comes to cars and transport, I believe most importantly, we need to use liquefied natural gas. LNG systems are much cheaper, and it's much cheaper to produce such machines with liquefied gas. It depends on the requirements. The technology is almost the same for compressed gas and liquefied gas. There is different technology for storing both of these types of gases. You can store liquefied natural gas at a temperature of more than 100 degrees in a thermos, and at some point it will evaporate. So if a car is moving the whole time continuously, let's say a car is going from Russia to Europe, then liquefied natural gas is better. Because if a car stops, the gas will heat up and it will evaporate in the atmosphere, and this is a huge loss. So let's think about how we can elaborate this program and work on it together, because it's true that we need to use the resources that we already have in the country. Our group of companies, GAS, was the first to develop natural gas engines. And second of all, we understand that there are some natural restrictions for using this technology. First of all, we don't have enough gas stations, and we need to introduce a more complex solution that will include gas stations across the country. Can you develop business in that way? We'll see, and thank you very much. Here we've got Patrick from IKEA.
Are you still there? We started with the Swedes, and now we go back to the Swedish company again. How do you like it living under socialism? Where there is more socialism, here in Russia or back there in Sweden? And I should say that IKEA, as we are used to calling it, this is one of the biggest investor in a non-oil and gas sphere. Patrick?
First of all, socialism or capitalism, I agree with most speakers that there has to be a mix of thinking in both directions. So I'm totally with you, and I think IKEA has that point of view of inclusive development. It's not for the few, but it's for the many. And it's really good to be back here today at the European Forum. It's been about 2 years since I was participating last time. And I would like to take the opportunity to talk a bit on the growth factors for our segment, the home furnishing production in Russia, and how we can create better conditions for this market segment. Because if the individual business areas grow, of course, the total Russian economy will grow with it. And I'm sure you can draw some parallels from what I will share, discuss also into other industries. Before starting, maybe a small context. Everybody knows about IKEA, but also our company actually owns the mega shopping centers. We also have logistics centers and logistics units. We have own factories that produce furniture. We work with over 50 local furniture suppliers. And this year we have also bought 49% stake in a solar photovoltaic PV plant. So we are now powering all our IKEAs and our distribution centers with renewable energy powered by. I'm very glad to say that IKEA in Russia has developed well over the past years, despite of the pandemic. And we expanded our footprint both physically and digitally. It has resulted in a 30% growth in our purchases from Russian furniture suppliers. And today, 50% of the products sold in Russia are actually made in Russia. However, this share we would like to continue to increase, and importantly also to export more out of Russia. So today we buy around 27 billion rubles of furniture products from Russian suppliers. Only a quarter of this is exported. We would like to export more, but unfortunately, as the situation is today, we cannot. Moreover, there is a risk over time now that we will start losing this export share, because if Russia do not change to adapt to the changing conditions. 2 years ago, I was speaking about two major directions in our arena that would support the home furnishing business. And I think we have to come back to the same two topics this year. When it comes to the furniture production and export from Russia, I'm a great believer. The country has a huge potential to become a world leader. We have the right geographical location between Asia and Europe. We have a lot of resources that are actually recyclable or renewable, and we have a lot of skilled people. We have suggested a 5-point home furnishing strategy to develop the industry with focus on harmonization of technical regulations. It's about renewable and recyclable raw materials, invest in modernization, upskilling, and funding. I will touch on the first two topics about harmonization and sustainable raw materials today. While technologies and consumer preferences are developing fast, the Russian standards, the cost standards, have not been revised for a very long time. This technical regulations on safety of furniture is based on very outdated Russian standards. The level of technical expertise and committees is not sufficient today, and many furniture companies are not involved in the development. There's very low harmonization between international EN and ISO standards. And Russian technical committees are not participating in international committees, which doesn't help us to integrate and understand where needed or take input where given. So no need to explain, but this obviously leads to a low competitiveness of Russian furniture in the international market. Russian furniture industry is lagging behind when it comes to safety and quality requirements. At the same time, government is increasing its control on compliance. And the regulations that we are controlling are not up to date. So manufacturers are forced to comply with outdated technologies and again, losing opportunities for export. The second factor that needs fast action is the climate change and the agenda that is going across the world in sustainability. It's nothing that we can see as a vague future threat anymore. It's already here, and it requires action from us, businesses, from the government, and for the many people. We need to become more sustainable. For example, IKEA has made a commitment that by 2030, we will only use recycled or renewable material in our products. These are not just words, we really mean it. And if we fail to deliver this in Russia, produce this in Russia, we have to produce it somewhere else, which is not what we want, because it will of course not be good for our Russian customers. Already today, we badly need recycled polyether fibers, yarn, fabric, we need PET, And we import these products today. We import recycled materials into Russia, giving it to our factories here in order to produce. So lack of recyclable raw materials hinders the development of this industry. There is no legal framework for production and marketing of goods of recycled textiles. So the whole recycling industry has to take a grip. We need to get this raw material into our industry. In addition to this, we also see another risk at the moment, which has emerged during the pandemic. It's the skyrocketing raw materials prices in Russia. It's out of proportion with the materials on the world market. And it further pushes the prices up for the Russian producers, reducing our export possibilities. So as a conclusion, I'd like to say, I believe, Russia has an enormous potential when it comes to home furnishing. The amount of raw materials, the geographical location, the skilled people, we can take this industry to great standards and be a good participant in the international market. But we need collaboration between government, between the industry, and to make it happen. So,
Спасибо. Thank you. Очень интересные темы подняты.
This is an interesting topic indeed. We haven't touched upon technical regulations yet today, which continues to be of increasing importance and is imposed by technical supervisory bodies, which, as you said, are not in line with international standards. This is a challenge we are to address. And certainly sustainable development issue is also important. What you said, that you recycle certain things and import it to Russia for you to be able to produce furniture, this is surprising. We are very often approached by recycling companies that there is no market in Russia. They have problems because they have no customers. And major companies, and Sergei confirmed that, Techno-Nicole company also imports wastes and garbage because this is something that don't have enough here in Russia. They export it from Japan. Can you imagine that? These are the problems our economy is facing now. Just imagine that. We don't have enough garbage of our own.
The question
Огромное, просто мы его захораниваем.
and the administration of all the garbage.
Спасибо, Patrick.
Thank you, Patrick, very much indeed. These were the right things to say, and I think these are interesting proposals that I hope will be further discussed and help us promote our economy. Thank you. Now we have two more speakers. These are two companies that are totally different, represent totally different sectors of our economy. The production of construction materials is indeed quite innovative, but this is more or less traditional. For our country, at least, large-scale production. Ilya Sachkov, founder and director general of Group IB, one of the most innovative technologies, a high-tech company, a company that is quite active in the market. Both companies work internationally, in international markets. Techno-Nicole has 8 enterprises abroad. So it has 8 companies abroad. Ilya's company is represented in various markets, selling cybersecurity services, primarily cybersecurity services abroad. The question is the same to both of you. Working in external markets here in Russia, if we are to compare them, there is more system, there is more logic out there abroad. But on the other hand, what makes local markets different from international markets from your point of view, Mr. Sachkov? For us, working internationally is the only way to survive, because if technologies is not competitive internationally in the international markets, then in Russia it is turned into something similar to our automobile industry, for instance, AutoVAZ. If you're not chosen in the international market, then in Russian your life will be very short. What makes our markets different? If we speak about countries that were represented in Asia-Pacific, in Europe, the headquarters in Amsterdam and Singapore, then civil service is related to the word to serve. This is what public servants do there. They help entrepreneurs. This is what makes different our civil servants from civil servants abroad. And that's the request we have. And this is something we voiced at St. Petersburg Economic Forum from a different entrepreneur. Please do not prevent engineers from doing their job. This is my brief answer to your question. Well, not creating obstacles does not help us solve all the problems. Sergey, what's your take on that? I like working everywhere. When I started businesses everywhere, I realized that I grew up here in the Russian culture, and it was difficult for me to accept this cultural code. Why did we have to go abroad? This was because of our ambitions. We wanted to export. Now we both export and produce. As for the challenges, trust for our brand. It takes a lot of time to win trust of people in Poland, Finland, and Germany, Australia, and England, you name it. It takes up about 5 to 10 years to make sure that your brand is trusted. And that's a long story, but then you can sell well. And if we started in Poland as a discounter, now we are market leaders, and local Polish consumers perceive us as high-quality product producers. Well, I see. Thank you. Yet another question, if I may. We have listened to several ideas, even though we are in more or less the same paradigm, so to speak. One question to Ilya Sachkov, if I may. We have a complex system of taxes. There is a golden standard of sorts that taxes should be kept simple. Let's have some political parties would propose to introduce just one tax on everything for businesses to know what they're paying for. Or, alternatively, should we look at this from the points of view of the state? Should we have complex taxes, something that modern systems allow us to do that? Or should we differentiate depending on the profitability of a particular sector? Should we vary depending on a particular region? Will IT technologies make it possible for such a system to exist? Let me voice something that may not be very popular with IT entrepreneurs. I'm in favor of complex taxation for a very simple reason, because the employment market in IT is global, and salaries around the world are more or less the same. For the company to be successful, its employees should be well paid and happy. That is why companies should be more effective. If a company have super incomes, super revenues, then it should have different taxes. That is why I am in favor of differentiation for the IT sector. And we are in favor of differentiated taxes for the rest of the economic sector. Yet another question. I think we're moving toward a conclusion. As for the delivery unit, do we need special reforms? Should we separate these development managers from current issues development? I don't think so, because any attempt of that sort can be very limited in its success. This is something we can see in many other countries. When there is there are headquarters of reforms guided by the government, and as a rule, people failed. What do you mean they failed? Give me a country where it failed. Let's look at Georgia. Why look at Georgia? Look at the first successful experience. Great Britain, China, Singapore. Mr. Titov, let me say a very simple thing. Let's look at the post-Soviet countries. Don't look at Singapore. Post-Soviet countries, my apologies, we can only look at a limited number of countries because they have very few successes. We can't do things the way they do in England. It will not allow us to do anything. Singapore, India, Malaysia, Italy, these are some of the countries that succeeded. Mr. Titov, I have voiced my personal point of view. We shouldn't be striving to demotivate others by ensuring success in individual areas. We should ensure overall success of our economy. Indeed, we should create a new economy for the entire country. We're not talking about individual successful areas. We're not talking about investment agency. This is a systemic macroeconomic organization. If that's the way it is, I fully agree with you. But this should be something enjoyed by all the sectors of our economy. We should change the entire system. Sergei, do you have a development department? Let me say that I support both of you. On the one hand, I understand that should be a department dealing with development. But roughly speaking, if we take Toyota, there is a functional council of experts that makes decision and managers that adopt that. There should be top managers implementing things. We understand that there should be people, human resources to be able to implement. This is this two-tier system that should be implemented. If the government is not prepared for that, it should renounce such efforts. If I don't think it's possible without changing the system. I like the way systems are run in the Toyota Corporation. Functional people should come up with bold decisions, but the government should be able to implement that, should be able to accept that. Otherwise, we will fail. I don't think there should be contradictions between the government and people elaborating reforms. Certainly, there is one head of state who is in charge of everything, and that person should make sure that the whole system is based on the system of laws adopted by parliament and accepted by people, recognized by people. If we look at the final page of our presentation, these reforms should be popular. If they are unpopular again and people do not recognize the need for this reform, the success will be very, very limited, if any. Allow me to add a little something. I don't like those who are shaping modern politics, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. They have done so. The system is there, and to make sure that the existing system is transformed into the correct system, we don't need an extra effort. To lower the interest rate of the central bank, we should get together and lower that rate. I don't think it's rocket science. As we speak now, it has been raised, by the way. So we shouldn't be inventing any fancy bodies. If people don't want the economy to develop, we can't do anything, regardless of what bodies we set up. This is what I'd like to round up our discussion. My final question, are reforms possible at all in the current situation? Is there a chance that there is someone who will be willing to carry out those reforms? Vladislav, as of today, I believe that reforms are perceived as a danger. This is something that is obvious to me. I at least feel that we are at the beginning of certain reconstruction, and we would be better off without changing anything. Sergei? I think that there are great changes in our construction industry. There are people willing to promote development, and Moscow has changed greatly. And I think that the construction sites that we see out there in Moscow will help the city transform the way it looked. So there are people out there who are willing to change things, but there are also people who will create impediments. The Ministry of Finances does not provide the necessary funding. More than 6 huge amounts of money is what we need. And another construction sector problem is the uneven expenses, major losses that exist in the manufacturing process. There are 8 types of losses, and they are uneven.
Then it means that the sector is just dying out, and they say that they don't need reforms. And what is happening? We're reducing our personnel, and after that, there is an explosion. Suddenly, everyone needs to produce as much as they had to produce last year. We used to supply our firms with the many builders, and many of them come from Uzbekistan or Kyrgyzstan, but this is not an easy job. We cannot find as many builders as they need. I don't know how to explain all of this, but can you explain that you don't run for a year and then you need to run 300 kilometers per day? So you need to invest step by step. Then number two, prices increased for all the materials, and none of the people could buy enough materials because they didn't have enough money. And then in August, they said that the prices would be compensated. And then this compensation, we will get it in October, and we will build the roads in October. You will see a lot of roadworks when there is a lot of snow. And not because we want to do it when it's cold, but because this is a system that's working this way. The Ministry of Finance is very conservative. It is so conservative that it only exacerbates the problem. Remember the growth in 2001, 2002, the money mass grew more than 20%. And now we don't have enough money, it is obvious. And the money that we do have is not used. So you need to either use the money or to lower the taxes. This is just logical. And so we collect the money, but we don't spend it. And we try to spend it, and it doesn't work like that. Then someone gets an order to increase the prices. But they are afraid to do so because they can be prosecuted. And the Ministry of Finance, when it allows you to change your bills, this can cause some problems. And all of this works together. All of this system works for 10 years. It has been working for 10 years like this, and the problem hasn't been solved yet. So this looks like some anti-monopoly recommendations. But he's the representative of the commissioner in this sphere. Well, at least we can see some positive changes, right? Mr. Sachkov, do you think we have a chance when it comes to digital technology? The second video that you've shown today, there were some positive reforms, and unless we carry them out, and I would even add one more, I'm talking about currency control. We cannot really develop exports with the current interface for currency control, especially when we're talking about high-tech exports. So unless we have these reforms, the Russian engineering sector and the Russian engineers, they will just leave Russia, as it always happens. This is what this is where we're now heading. Thank you. Well, I'm an optimist. And they say that we're sometimes killing the good when we're striving for the best. But I believe that the reforms will be natural even if we don't want it. And Friedrich, are you here with us? What do you think? Mr. Reinfeldt?
Yes, I'm with you.
Once
Well, I think there is a lot of optimism in the world coming out of the pandemic. A lot of good initiatives taken when I hear from investors and so on. But I think, and I've listened very thoroughly to all your remarks, and I think this coming back of basic rule of law, being also competitive on international markets is extremely important. That's the way how to become a survivor in modern business life and also get into export markets. So all the remarks done on how to make that more possible in Russia, like the intervention from IKEA, I think is extremely important to listen to.
Что ж, спасибо большое за очень ценные ремарки, замечания.
Thank you very much for your valuable remarks. I believe that the audience has probably heard some very interesting comments, and many things that have been discussed today will be used in our program that is called Growth for Everyone. And this way, we can make it a bit more organized. Thank you very much to all of our panel guests and to all of our participants. And thank you very much for coming to the Stolypin Forum.
Приглашаем вас на пресс-подход, который состоится у сцены шатра номер 1.